When I landed the night guard job at the old museum, I thought it would be a breeze. Just patrolling empty halls, maybe catching up on some reading. Turns out I was wrong. The first few nights were uneventful, the silence occasionally interrupted by the creaking of the old building. One night, however, as I was walking through the ancient Egypt exhibit, I noticed something peculiar. The sarcophagus, which was always closed, was slightly ajar. I closed it, blaming faulty hinges, and moved on. For those of you unfamiliar, a sarcophagus is a coffin, most commonly carved in stone, and usually displayed above ground. But then, it happened again. And this time, as I closed the lid, I could swear I heard a low growl from within. An unsettling feeling washed over me, but I shrugged it off. A few nights later, I was patrolling the same exhibit when I heard a scraping sound. Turning around, I found the sarcophagus fully open. But that wasn't what sent a chill down my spine. It was the footprints in the dust leading away from it, footprints that looked more like claw marks. Before I could make sense of it, a guttural growl echoed through the hall. I spun around, but there was nothing. Just shadows and artifacts under the dim lighting. I started seeing things out of the corner of my eye. A shape moving here, a shadow shifting there. A constant feeling of being watched made my shifts unbearable. And then, one night, I saw it. I was checking the security monitors when I noticed movement in the Egypt exhibit. As I switched to the camera, my blood ran cold. There, in front of the sarcophagus, was a figure. It was hunched over, with piercing red eyes that glowed in the grainy footage. It seemed to stare right into the camera, right into me, before the feed abruptly cut off. I wanted to quit the job that very night, never stepping foot in the museum again. I didn't know what haunted that place, and frankly, I didn't want to know. Most nights, when I'm alone in my apartment, I still feel those red eyes watching me. One Tuesday evening, my phone alerted me to a notification from the museum's security system. Motion detected at the ancient Egypt exhibit. Against my better judgment, I opened the security camera feed on my phone. The Egypt exhibit was empty, just as it should have been. Then the camera feed started to flicker, and I saw a figure at the edge of the screen. The same hunched figure with glowing red eyes I had seen in my last shift. It was there, outside the museum, seemingly staring into the camera. Then it began to move, its gait uncannily swift and silent. It was moving away from the museum, disappearing into the night. I watched in abject horror as the feed on my phone switched to another camera, the one closest to my apartment building. The figure reappeared, closer now. Then the feed cut off. My phone fell from my shaking hands, clattering onto the floor. All was silent again, but the silence was not comforting. I lay frozen in my bed, not daring to move. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears, my breath coming in short gasps. Then, I heard it. A low growl, just outside my apartment door. I had thought I was safe, that whatever it was confined to the museum. But now it seemed it had found a new haunt. It was just outside, and I was trapped inside, alone and terrified, waiting for dawn to break. The beast, as I started calling it, never tried to enter my apartment. It would appear each night, growling outside my door, and then, at the first light of dawn, it would disappear. This became my new normal. I began sleeping during the day, spending my nights wide awake, listening to the beast. Just when I thought things couldn't get any stranger, I started receiving the letters. They were neatly handwritten, filled with strange symbols I couldn't understand. They arrived every day, no return address, no explanation. I tried to ignore them at first, tossing them out unopened, but they kept coming, piling up in my mailbox. Finally, out of a mix of curiosity and desperation, I opened one. The symbols seemed to dance before my eyes, and I felt an eerie sense of dread. Frustrated, I began researching the symbols online. Days turned into weeks as I delved into old texts and obscure languages. And then one night, I discovered that the symbols were an ancient form of hieroglyphics. Each letter was a message, a warning. They told of an ancient curse, a beast bound to the sarcophagus I'd seen at the museum. But there was more. The beast was not the threat. It was a guardian. Its task was to prevent the true horror, the entity the sarcophagus was designed to contain, from escaping. My blood ran cold. The night the sarcophagus first opened, had the real evil been released? The letters didn't say what the entity was, only that its release would bring about unimaginable chaos. That was the real nightmare. The beast was no longer a tormentor, but an ally. An ally I feared we had already failed. Each growl outside my door was not a threat. but a warning of the impending horror we were now facing. And now, I was left alone to decipher ancient codes in a desperate attempt to prevent a catastrophe we had unwittingly unleashed. The coming weeks were spent in a whirlwind of research and deciphering. Each letter offered pieces of a puzzle, ancient rituals, and forgotten lore. I learned more about the entity, a force of chaos that was said to warp reality, bringing the nightmares of men to life. Then, one night, the beast stopped coming. The growling ceased, and a terrifying silence took its place. My heart pounded in the hollow quiet. Had the beast been defeated, or had it simply abandoned its post, giving up on the humans who had unwittingly released its charge? The next day, the city began to change. People whispered about strange occurrences, shadows moving on their own, voices with no source, nightmares bleeding into the waking world. It seemed the entity was beginning to flex its powers, and the reality around us was starting to warp. With a growing sense of dread, I worked harder to understand the remaining letters. They seemed to hint at a ritual, a way to return the entity to its sarcophagus. But it was intricate, and required knowledge and materials I didn't have. Then one day, as I was returning to my apartment, I found a new letter. This one was different. It wasn't filled with symbols or ancient lore. Instead, it was a simple message, written in clear English. "The Guardian awaits at the old place." My mind raced. The Guardian? Could it mean the beast? And the old place? The museum? I felt a rush of hope. Maybe we weren't defeated yet. Maybe there was still a chance to contain the entity and restore order. Gathering the letters and my hastily scrawled notes, I set off for the museum. The city around me seemed to ripple, buildings and roads shifting subtly under the twilight sky. The entity was growing stronger. Time was running out. As I approached the museum, I heard a familiar growl. The beast was there, waiting. We had a common enemy now, and a common purpose. Together, we would confront the chaos unleashed on our world. I didn't know if we would succeed, or even survive. But as I walked into the museum, the beast at my side, I knew we had to try. The world was descending into a nightmare, and it was up to us to wake it up. The real battle was just about to begin. As I entered the museum, I noticed a change. The building seemed alive, buzzing with an energy I had never felt before. The artifacts glowed under the dim lighting, their shadows dancing on the walls. The beast prowled alongside me, a silent partner in this precarious mission. The whispers started then, echoing through the empty halls. But unlike the indistinct mutterings that used to haunt my apartment, these voices were different, urgent, and seemingly directed towards us. Each word seemed to vibrate in my mind, forming a guiding path towards the ancient Egypt exhibit. In the exhibit hall, the sarcophagus stood as it always had, a silent sentinel. The whispers grew louder here, and the air felt heavy, almost electric. As I walked toward the sarcophagus, the beast tensed, letting out a low growl. The whispers started merging into one voice, reciting the same phrase over and over. "The gate must be sealed." Looking at my notes, I started performing the ritual. I traced the symbols from the letters onto the sarcophagus, my hands shaking. The whispers continued their relentless chant. Suddenly, there was a shift in the atmosphere. An intense cold swept through the hall, and the sarcophagus began to glow, the symbols I had drawn shining brightly. A thunderous roar filled the room, drowning the whispers. Then there was silence. The whispers had stopped. The sarcophagus was closed again, its glow fading. The beast, too, had become quiet, its red eyes softer. Exhausted and overwhelmed, I turned to leave the museum. The beast followed me out, disappearing into the night. The city seemed to breathe again, the earlier distortions fading away. In the days that followed, the strange occurrences stopped. The nightmares receded, and the city returned to normal. The letters stopped coming too. The beast never returned, but sometimes, in the still of the night, I thought I could hear a distant growl. I never forgot the horror we unleashed, or the dread of those endless nights. But life moved on. And with it, the memory of the entity, the beast, and the whispers faded into the background, becoming a chilling reminder of the nightmares we had lived and the chaos we had survived.
I've never been a superstitious person. You know, the type that checks under the bed for monsters or avoids stepping on cracks in the pavement. But what I experienced last summer changed my perspective forever. I never would have thought I'd become one of those people who tell ghost stories. But here I am, and this is my story. I'd moved into a rental home in a small coastal town. It was old but charming, with creaky wooden floors and a lingering smell of salt air. It had been sitting vacant for some time, and I figured it was due to the off-season. The first few weeks were calm, even peaceful. I enjoyed the solitude, the sound of waves lapping against the shore at night, the occasional cries of seagulls. But it didn't take long for the strange occurrences to start. The first incident was subtle. I'd come home from a walk on the beach to find the front door ajar. I was certain I'd locked it, but I dismissed it as a lapse in memory. But then other things started happening. Items disappearing and reappearing in odd places, lights flickering, and once, a cold draft that swept through the house even though all windows and doors were firmly shut. But the night that truly terrified me came about a month into my stay. I was in bed, halfway between wakefulness and sleep, when I heard a faint whispering. It seemed to come from the next room, too indistinct for me to make out any words. I dismissed it as the wind, but it grew louder, turning into a murmur that sent chills down my spine. Summoning my courage, I crept out of bed and tiptoed towards the source. The whispers seemed to be coming from the attic. Standing at the foot of the attic stairs, I felt an unexplainable dread wash over me. I should have turned back, but something compelled me to climb the stairs. The murmuring got louder as I neared the top. Then, suddenly, it stopped. The silence was deafening. I pulled the chain of the bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. A dim light filled the room. It was mostly empty, save for an old mirror standing against the far wall. My reflection stared back at me, but something wasn't right. I was alone in the attic, but in the mirror, I wasn't alone. Behind me, there was an old woman, her eyes empty and hollow. As I spun around in horror, there was nothing but the empty room. When I looked back at the mirror, she was gone. That's when I heard it, a shrill, haunting laughter echoing through the house. I ran, stumbling down the stairs, the laughter following me. I packed up and left that night, vowing never to return. I don't know who the old woman was or why she haunted the house. I don't want to know. All I know is that what I saw, what I heard, was real. But it didn't end there. I thought leaving the house would put an end to my nightmare. I was wrong. The laughter followed me. I'd hear it in quiet moments, alone in my new apartment, in the dead of the night. Sometimes I'd wake from a deep sleep, the echo of that cackling ringing in my ears. It was as if it had taken up residence inside my head. And then I started seeing her again. Not just in mirrors, but everywhere. The old woman with her hollow eyes would appear in windows, in the reflections of my laptop screen, even in the surface of a coffee cup. Each time she'd just stand there watching me. Desperate, I sought professional help. Therapists, psychics, paranormal experts, you name it. Some were sympathetic, some were skeptical, and others saw an opportunity to cash in on my fear. Yet, nothing changed. And then, one day, I found myself standing in front of the old rental house again. I don't know what brought me back. Perhaps it was desperation, or maybe I was seeking closure. Either way, I was standing on the porch, staring at the door. Swallowing my fear, I turned the knob. The house was just as I'd left it, eerily silent and untouched. Gathering my courage, I ascended the attic stairs. In the dim light, I faced the old mirror once more. But this time, it was just my reflection staring back. No ghostly apparitions, no haunting laughter, just silence. As I looked at myself in the mirror, I felt a strange calm. It was as if coming face to face with my fears had diminished their power over me. And then, I saw her. The old woman appeared in the mirror, standing behind me. But this time she wasn't scary or menacing. Her eyes, once hollow, seemed kinder. Her presence was comforting rather than threatening. Perhaps it was my mind playing tricks, but I could swear she spoke to me. Not in words, but with a feeling of understanding, of acceptance. It was as if she had been trying to tell me something all along, and I had been too afraid to listen. From that day forward, the laughter ceased, and the apparition stopped. I still see her sometimes, in a reflection, in a window. But now, it doesn't scare me. I've come to see her not as a haunting, but as a reminder of that summer, of my fears, and of the strength I discovered in facing them. It didn't end there, but it changed. My fear turned into acceptance, my nightmare into a strange companionship. I don't expect anyone to believe me. But if you ever find yourself facing something inexplicable, remember my story. Fear may haunt you, but the power to overcome it lies within you. I may have come to terms with this encounter, but it wouldn't be long before something equally as sinister began happening. Days turned into weeks, and then into months. My life had regained some semblance of normality, a peaceful rhythm of mundane existence. That was until the dreams started. They weren't just ordinary dreams. These were vivid, lucid experiences that invaded my sleep night after night. Each time I would find myself in the same desolate landscape, under a sky that was perpetually twilight, a land that seemed forgotten by time. At the center of this dreamscape stood a towering, ancient tree. Its gnarled roots ran deep into the ashen earth, and its leafless branches reached out like skeletal arms. Hanging from a thick limb was an old-fashioned pendulum clock, the kind you might find in a grandparent's house. Each night, I would find myself drawn to the clock, captivated by the rhythmic swaying of its pendulum. Then, the clock would begin to chime, each resonant toll reverberating through the still air, sending a shiver down my spine. I could never remember how the dream ended. I would always wake up as the 12th chime sounded, my heart pounding, the chilling echo of the tolls still ringing in my ears. These dreams, while unsettling, weren't what truly unnerved me. The truly sinister part was what began happening in my waking life. One day, I stumbled upon a yard sale in the neighborhood. Among the assorted knickknacks, one item caught my eye: a pendulum clock, identical to the one in my dreams. An eerie feeling washed over me, but I dismissed it as a coincidence. That night, the dream returned. Only this time, the 12th chime never came. I woke up in a cold sweat, the 11th toll echoing in my mind. The next day, the clock from the yard sale showed up on my doorstep with no note or explanation. A shiver ran down my spine as I stared at it. It was identical to the one from my dream, right down to the intricate carving on its weathered wooden case. I couldn't explain it. Was I dreaming of the clock because I had seen it at the yard sale, or was it the other way around? It felt like I was caught in a sinister loop, a chilling game of cat and mouse with an unseen player. The dreams persisted, growing more intense with each passing night. The clock, now sitting ominously in my living room, seemed to be a physical manifestation of my nightmares. It was as if something, or someone, was trying to communicate with me through the dreams, using the clock as a conduit. Just as I had faced the apparition in the old house, I knew I had to confront this new terror. As the clock struck midnight, I sat down before it, the silence of the night pressing in around me. I was ready to face whatever came next.
Leave us a comment if you'd like to hear what happens next. Please also like and subscribe. Thank you.